Welcome to Kings Peak High School. Today we're going to talk about literary genres. This is an introduction. Genre, which is a French word, hence why it is pronounced this way, has a simple definition. Genre is categories used to group different types of literary work, such as nonfiction, fiction, and poetry. We are going to focus today on nonfiction and fiction. So, the three basic genres are fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. These are based on the kinds of writing that is done. Fiction is generally narrative and can be based on anything. Nonfiction is generally narrative but can also be informational text or speeches, both of which are written in prose. Poetry can be many things but is always written in verse. We'll talk about poetry at another time. There are also dramatic genre and other things that we will deal with later. Our genre list. It is important to remember that this list does not include all types of genres found in literary works. There are literally thousands. There are many different genre classification systems. We are only going to talk about some of them. Nonfiction. This category can also be called informational material. Sometimes we call this informational text. These types of books or articles provide information that is factual. There is nothing make-believe in these types of materials. When we talk about genres of nonfiction, while these are technically sub-genres, we often call the genres based on the writing conventions of nonfiction genres. Biographies are nonfiction narratives about a singular person. Persuasive speeches are written to be said aloud and to convince. Instructions explain how to do or make something, etc. We're going to focus on two kinds of narrative nonfiction genres. Biographies, a true account of a person's life, written, composed, or produced by another person later. Autobiographies, the biography of a person that is written by that person. Now, obviously, this is a very small list of nonfiction genres. Fiction genres. In this type of work, the author may make up the entire story. Authors can also choose to include factual information in a made-up story, and often do. The author can have wizards creating magic spells, or it can be about a teen who has a secret crush, or it can be a person lost in the wilderness. The subjects are limitless. And there are many, many different types of fiction. When we talk about genres of fiction, while these are technically subgenres, they are also called genres based on plot conventions of literary fiction genres. Plot conventions are things like science fiction involves science that doesn't yet exist. Fantasy involves a setting that is set in a mythic past and generally involves magic. Noir involves detectives and morally complicated characters. We're going to go over some of the most common fiction genres for novels. Historical fiction. The story takes the reader back to a particular time period where they learn about the everyday life of a person in that time period. The character may interact with actual historical characters, but usually the main character is not based on a real person. Realistic fiction. The story presents a problem to be examined that could be from anybody's life. These stories cover such topics as family situations, peer relationships, and cultural differences, and they are based on reality, but do not involve real historical characters generally. Science fiction. This type of Modern fantasy. It explores scientific fact and can pose ethical questions about current scientific trends and predictions. The author focuses on the adventure of exploring the unknown and the wonder of discovering new worlds and people. Mysteries. There are many different types of mystery stories. Noir, true crime, crime in general, but they usually involve a crime that has been committed and the reader wants to try to figure out who done it. There is usually a great deal of suspense and intrigue. Fantasy. In this type of story, the author has created a magical world where anything is possible. There are many types of fantasies, from fables to fairy tales, from high fantasy to grimdark fantasy. Stories may include magical beings, talking animals, or gods and goddesses. Fairy tale, a sub-genre of fantasy, or a sub-subgenre of fiction. We often know we are reading or hearing a fairy tale with the words once upon a time. Fairy tales often feature a fight between good and evil. Evil always loses to the triumphant hero and heroine. That's modern fairy tales. Historical fairy tales, the good guys don't always win. We also know it's a fairy tale because most end with, and they lived happily ever after. And that, again, is a modern thing. In the 18th century, that was not true. Myths. A story or group of stories that form part of a traditional knowledge of a society. Myths are often used in imaginative plots and characters to explain how the world began and why nature and people behave the way they do. And they generally involve gods. Utopian fiction. This is a subgenre of science fiction. Fiction about an imaginary community or a society that possesses highly desirable and nearly perfect qualities for its citizens. Dystopian fiction. Fiction about an imaginary community or society that possesses highly undesirable or very flawed qualities for its citizens. And these are just some of the thousands of genres we encounter in fiction.